Good morning and welcome everyone to the Maryland Soil Conservation District Supervisor Orientation. This is a orientation for both new supervisors and then a refresher on some information that all board supervisors should have. So I'm Alicia Mulkey. I'm Executive Secretary of the State Soil Conservation Committee, and I'm joined today by Jen Nelson, the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Soil Conservation Districts. Next slide. So we have several modules that we'll go through today. They're divided into these 7 chapters. First, history of the conservation movement. Second, what is a soil conservation district, both a national and state perspective. An overview of Maryland's conservation partnership. And then in chapter 4, we'll get into the roles and responsibilities of the supervisors within the districts. Chapter 5 is ethics. Chapter 6 is understanding local, state, and federal laws that pertain to the districts. And then we'll have some additional considerations for supervisors in chapter 7. Next slide.
Okay, so I will start with the history of the conservation movement. So when you're talking about the origins of the conservation movement, I'm pretty sure that you are legally required to talk about 2 things, including the Dust Bowl and Hugh Hammond Bennett. So the Dust Bowl was an event, a series of events in the 1930s in the Midwest that resulted after World War I from overcultivation of soils combined with drought conditions for several years. And so what happened is it resulted in these significant dust storms, frequent and significant, that created a threat both to human health, to animal health, to property, and ultimately required a lot of people to leave the land. Just it wasn't tenable to continue with it. And so Hugh Hammond Bennett, this is a magnet from my fridge, courtesy of the Soil and Water Conservation Society, was he's known as the father of conservation. So he was a soil surveyor. He co-wrote an influential piece, Soil Erosion, a National Menace, in 1928. And he was the first director of the Soil Erosion Service created in 1933, which essentially was kind of a pilot project to demonstrate the effectiveness of soil erosion practices in response to some of the early events in the Dust Bowl. He was a really influential speaker and very passionate about conservation. And so when that Soil Erosion Service started to run out of funding in 1935, he addressed Congress to ensure that that the project continued, basically. And so he gave that address to Congress. He timed it with a dust storm that happened to be rolling into DC at that time. And he was successful in convincing Congress to establish the Soil Conservation Service, which ultimately became the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. So in 1937, Franklin Roosevelt was president by then, and he had sent a letter to all of the state governors with sample legislation recommending enactment of soil conservation district legislation in each state. It includes a quote that you may have heard: "The nation that destroys its soil destroys itself." And so the proposed act suggested establishing districts to direct and manage soil erosion control programs, using local citizens participating voluntarily in planning and installing conservation practices. So each district would be empowered to determine local needs, would have personal contact with local individual landowners within the community, and would be able to encourage maximum cooperation on a voluntary basis. And that's basically still the same template that we adhere to today. So the very first conservation district in the nation was established in 1937 in North Carolina, Hugh Hammond Bennett's home state and district. And then Maryland wasn't far behind, with Kent County forming the first soil conservation district in 1938. And so within the next 20 years, all of the districts in Maryland were formed. And so here is a screenshot of that legislation in Maryland, and that is still in Maryland's code today. So a lot of the powers and roles and responsibilities that we're going to talk about later on in the presentation were first established in this enabling legislation.
All right, Chapter 2, what is a soil conservation district? Next slide. So in Maryland, like many states, as Jen was saying, as to how we're organized, the soil conservation districts are an independent political subdivision of the state. They are not housed within the agency, but actually stand as their own independent entity in state government. Those powers of the districts we'll talk about in more detail, but provide extensive authority to the district and to the board to exercise public power on behalf of the district and its territory. The district and the board members are highly empowered to really act at the local level. And so really we see the job operationally for the districts to be that local link between your landowners and the operators to provide those conservation services and conservation benefits to your district territory. So then also within each district, we see that there's a governmental structure. We have a board of 5 appointed supervisors that oversee each of the 24 districts. The qualifications to be a board member are fairly minimal. You need to be a resident of the district that you're serving with an interest or knowledge on conservation and natural resources. And you may not hold another, what we term an office of profit in the state of Maryland. So as an appointed official of the district, you have the responsibility to direct the conservation needs within your community. Again, really focused on acting locally and being empowered locally within the district itself. Next slide. So a little more about the supervisor appointments and how they occur within Maryland. The board, like I said, have 5 appointed members. The appointment structure is in state law and was developed several decades ago and consists of these 5 portions. So 1 member is nominated by the local chapter of the Farm Bureau. A 2nd member is nominated by the local University of Maryland Extension, the ag agent within most of the districts. There are 2 at-large that are just local residents of the district, and a 5th member that is appointed by the county government, whether that be the county executive or a county council. So all 4 members listed first are appointed by the State Soil Conservation Committee. The exclusion is the county governing body. So the State Soil Conservation Committee meets monthly. They will consider the nominations provided by Farm Bureau, Extension, or the at-large members, and then State Committee will take action to actually appoint that board supervisor. Supervisors are appointed to a 5-year term, and there are no term limits. So a board member can be reappointed many times over the course of their service to the district. Each time a board member is appointed or reappointed, you do have to take a new oath of office, and you do have to make recognition that you're accepting an office of profit within the state of Maryland, again, because you can't hold 2 office of profits, so we have to avoid those conflicts. There is an attendance requirement for board supervisors to be at least 50% of meetings, so the board meetings are held monthly. You have to attend at least half of those over a rolling 12-month period. If you're unable to attend, then you are automatically disqualified from retaining your seat as a board supervisor. And then we also have associate supervisors that are not appointed, but are at the discretion of each district to recruit and to bring on as potential future members. There is no attendance requirement for associate supervisors. Next slide. So within the board, we see several roles. Again, the board has the ability to kind of select among themselves within these leadership positions. So the 3 positions are typically the chair, the vice chair, and the treasurer. The chair often is selected annually. Again, can be somebody that can be in a recurring role, but really serves to be the leader of the board, really offering facilitation across the board meeting itself and facilitating regular discussion between the board, the district manager, and often the district conservationist, and is often the one speaking on behalf of the other board members on key issues. They are served by a vice chair and then a treasurer that would handle the financials for the district itself as well. There's often a secretary that also supports the board. These are often the University of Extension ag agents, so not an appointed board member, but the University Extension, through partnerships and longtime affiliations with the district, will often have Extension serving in the role of secretary to help attend meetings, capture minutes, and distribute documents on behalf of the board as needed. And then lastly, for just general recruitment and representation that we talk about with the board, of really thinking about not just among the board members in the leadership roles that they carry, but also kind of forward thinking about how we're recruiting and retaining new members, using that associate supervisor role as a way to really think about as folks are losing capacity or interest in being able to serve the board and looking at what the future succession may look like, thinking about associate supervisors and others in the ag community that may bring expertise or important insight and representation to the district structure itself. So all of that should be considered as the board is deciding its roles and acting on programs within the district. Next slide. And then briefly, the office of profit. Again, we've said this, that the board supervisor cannot hold two office of profit. So it's important for folks to understand that definition within the state of Maryland. So it has two components. First, that being a public office. So this is a position created by law, which casts on incumbent duties that are continuing in their nature, which again is a board supervisor meeting monthly and carrying on a business of the district. And you are charged to exercise a portion of the powers of state government. We're going to talk about those powers of the districts in another chapter. But again, you're acting as essentially a public official, acting on behalf of the districts. But it does not include employees of government agencies as considered in the definition of public office. And then second is profit. So that is not just the fees and salaries and compensation. So most supervisors receive a per diem or reimbursement for their time serving the board, reimbursed for their expenses when they're traveling to meetings or conferences. So there is a salary and fees associated with your serving with the district supervisors. So those two components make up what we consider to be an office of profit. And like I said, avoid any conflict with having a dual office within other institutions or commissions within the state of Maryland. Next slide. Okay.
So Maryland's Conservation Partnership. So in each district field office, the staff there is usually a mix of federal, state, and local or district employees, and we're all working together towards a common goal. So often shared office space and perform duties as a team. So that shared office space, sometimes you'll hear that referred to as co-location. And that team is usually made up of USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, MDA, and district employees funded by the district and local or state government. So service centers may also house Farm Service Agency staff, University of Maryland Extension, and others. And when that is feasible, then it becomes a one-stop resource for farmers and landowners to receive technical and financial assistance. So for a typical district structure, although it's difficult to show exactly how your district is structured, Maryland districts are generally organized in the same manner. So the Board of Supervisors provides overall supervision and sets policy to address local resource concerns. And the board assures that the district performs tasks that are required by law, and also that it follows through on commitments established in memorandums of understanding, MOUs or MOAs. And then the everyday business of running a district is handled by the district staff. The district conservationist, or DC, is responsible for providing technical supervision, plan reviews, etc. And then the district manager is responsible for handling administrative details, office operations, and plan approvals on the board's behalf. So the managers may also assume some of the technical responsibilities as well. Now, each of the boards, each reports to the Board of Supervisors and provides the board with the information that it needs to make policy and planning decisions. So just looking at this overall, the district board is responsible for setting policy, for creating work plans, that the district manager is responsible with the district staff for implementing. Okay, so it's everybody's responsibility on this chart to provide the information and context that helps the district board in order to make those decisions. And it's the district board's responsibility to integrate all of that information, to ask questions, to be engaged, and to use their own experience in order to address those local resource concerns. So just in a very broad overview of some of the federal and state programs, not an exhaustive list by any means, but on the federal level, some of the Farm Bill programs that you'll run into include the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, administered by NRCS and delivered through soil conservation districts. So generally, the program provides financial assistance up to 75% of the installation of best management practices, and contracts are from 1 to 10 years in length. And so EQIP and the max funding at the state level might be combined to increase that percentage of cost share. There's the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, that helps agricultural producers maintain and improve their existing conservation systems and adopt additional practices to address priority resource concerns. So CSP, in that case, the participants earn payments for performance. And so the higher the performance, the higher the payment. And then there is also the Conservation Reserve Program and Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, CRP and CREP, that are administered by FSA, designed to set aside highly erodible land and other sensitive land and provide rental payments to a farmer for a period of 10 to 15 years. So the districts have a role often in that program as well. So on the state level, the state offers Maryland's Agricultural Water Quality Cost Share, or MAX program, established in 1984 to help farmers protect natural resources on their farms and comply with federal and state environmental regulations. So MAX provides farmers with grants to cover up to 100% of the cost to install BMPs on their farms, to control soil erosion, manage nutrients, and safeguard water quality. So maximum funding level of up to $75,000 per project applies, excluding animal waste treatment systems. And as we said before, in many instances, MAX and USDA funds can be combined to fund a project together. There's also the Manure Transport Program, which provides cost share assistance of up to $28 per ton to transport manure from animal operations with excess waste, or documentation of phosphorus over-enrichment. There is the Cover Crop Program, which provides an annual payment plus potential incentives to cover labor, seed, equipment costs for the planting of eligible fall cover crops. And there are several new initiatives that are getting underway to include Cover Crops Plus, to include initiatives for small farms and urban agriculture, a conservation buffer initiative, and healthy soils. So looking at just a quick overview, because we have MASCD, who I work with, and State Committee, who Alicia works with, and just a little bit about the difference and similarities between the two of them, because we do overlap quite a bit. So State Committee was established in 1938 by statute to serve as the administration and oversight, and a critical link between MDA and the districts. So The structure of state committee is that there's a member from each of the 5 regions in Maryland, as well as representatives from MDA, MDE, DNR, Ag Commission, MASCD, UMD, and additional advisors. And so they serve an advisory role, that connection between the districts and those partners to the Secretary of Agriculture on issues related to resource conservation. And then MASCD was established in 1945, and what it does that differs from state committee is that it serves as kind of the outward-facing voice of the conservation districts, a single statewide voice for all the districts in Maryland. So the membership with MASCD has 120, all 120 district supervisors. And then each of the chairs of those districts makes up the board of directors. And so our focus is to represent the conservation districts on a statewide basis. We also, along with state committee, we both provide an arena or forum for individuals to discuss issues on a statewide level. MASCD has more capacity for working with elected officials. So we're, as a nonprofit organization, we're limited in how much we can lobby. We focus on more education and outreach to elected officials. But we do have the capacity to do that on behalf of the conservation districts on that statewide and national level. And so those are some of the major differences. I'm going to stop here and see if Alicia has anything to add on any of the slides in this section or on this piece in particular.
Thanks, Jen. No, I think this is a helpful chart to differentiate a little bit, but also recognize that while the voting membership of the two are distinct, really both are there to provide a forum and a voice for the district, either locally or, like you suggest, maybe even on kind of the state level, and advocate for some legislation in a way. So we each have our role, work very closely and coordinate together on a number of initiatives, and appreciate the engagement of the board supervisors in every instance.
Absolutely.
Okay, I think we're chapter 4 for the district supervisor's roles and responsibilities. Next slide. Okay, so you've been appointed a board member or reappointed potentially, and we thank you for your service. And now you're here and thinking, well, what is it that I'm tasked to do? So there's a learning curve, and hopefully this orientation is giving everybody a little bit of a flavor, and we can certainly answer questions. But really just a couple key points here before we get into the powers of the board. First and foremost, you are an appointed local official, so there are legal responsibilities associated with your position. Largely kind of on an operational, you're charged with conducting the affairs of the district as set forth in state law. Your goal as a board supervisor is to stay engaged, to help establish and implement programs through the conservation partnership that Jen just described, to protect and conserve soil, water, prime and unique farmland, rangeland, woodland, wildlife, energy, and other renewable resources on local, non-federal, essentially private land. So any and all natural resource concerns are within the domain of the district to consider, and to provide that financial and technical assistance we've alluded to. And in form of engagement, you are required to attend the monthly board meetings. You have to attend at least, there's 12 each year. You have to attend at least 50% of those, as we've said, as well as any other committee or special meetings or events that may be scheduled for the board, either through MASCD, state committee, or other such. Expectation for board members to stay engaged outside of just the monthly board meetings is there as well. And for you to identify local conservation needs that represent the diversity of agriculture in your community, and to use that structure and the communications either with the district conservationist and district manager, or to elevate it through state committee and MASCD to really speak to the local needs within your community as you know them to be for your particular agricultural landowners and operators. Next slide. So then in terms of the powers themselves, again, these are enumerated in state law. They're very specific. They are very extensive. So we'll take time and go through each of them. And then we've also provided an example just to be able to give a little context beyond what is just written into the Maryland Ag article. So first, the power of the supervisors is one, to conduct surveys, investigations, or research and disseminate that information. So an example of this could be soil surveys, watershed studies, research that would be conducted, again, within the boundaries of the district itself. Number two, the ability to conduct demonstration projects, whether this be, hosting field tours, doing installation of new and innovative conservation practices, showcase watersheds where folks were able to look at how some conservation is being locally applied. All of that is a power of the Board of Supervisors. Number three, carry out preventative and control measures in the district on state-owned land. As an example, so there are, in many cases in Prince George's County, there is some USDA territory. In Dorchester, there is the Blackwater Wildlife Refuge. So any of those grounds that are held by the state or public lands, maybe even held federal, there is the ability of the district to work collectively with those public entities and organizations to be able to address soil erosion, water quality, any kind of conservation needs on those non-private lands. Number four, enter agreements to furnish assistance to any government entity or private individuals. This says that the districts can enter into contracts. This can be cooperator agreements with some of the conservation partners, such as NRCS and USDA. It can also be contractual agreements with third-party private consulting or engineering services. You have the ability to enter into those legal agreements. Number five, you can acquire, lease, purchase, exchange, gift, grant, sell, or dispose of real or personal property. So in some cases, the districts are landholders. They own the land and the buildings where the district offices themselves are. And so you can enter into real estate transactions for those grounds that you acquire and or sell on behalf of conducting business of the district. Next, maintain, administer, improve, receive, and expend income from acquired properties. Again, some of the districts own those office buildings, so maybe they are generating rental revenue from other lessees in the building. That revenue is then maintained by the district itself and is able to be expended on other needs that are specific to the district, as well as conducting their business. And then last, make available to district land occupiers machinery, fertilizer, seedlings, any etc. materials to conserve soil resources and prevent erosion according to the terms prescribed by the supervisors. So this speaks to what we call the conservation equipment rental program. Several districts have, as an example, no-till planters or some other pieces of equipment, maybe new innovative conservation equipment that may not be readily available yet in their area. We have a picture of a manure injector here. The district can own that equipment and set its own rental rates and its own rental policies, and then provide that equipment at a cost to the landowners, occupiers, and operators within the district itself. Next slide. So then we continue with the powers here. First is to take over or administer any soil conservation, erosion control, or erosion prevention project. So in some cases, there are delegated authorities from other organizations, the Maryland Department of Environment. In some cases, the districts are just a known technical assistance provider and someone who kind of formally takes a role with design and construction oversight. But again, that ability to be readily involved and the flexibility of the district to have a formal role in any soil erosion preventative measures is the primary purpose and function of the districts, and is spoken to in the powers of the districts to be involved within that context. Next, you may act as an agent of the United States or the state in connection with acquisition, construction, operation of soil conservation and erosion control or prevention projects. So again, the legal ability of the district to enter into contracts, to be a grantee or a named recipient, or to go into contracts for specific projects that are for the stated outcome of conservation. and erosion control, that legally you're able to be a designee and assignee into those contracts and into those projects themselves. Third on the list, you can accept gifts of money, service, materials from the United States and state to carry out the objectives. So again, building on the second here, to be a grantee, the districts often can go after additional funding sources to implement, whether they be stream restoration projects or larger capital improvement projects that are maybe outside their other funding sources they may receive, that the district can pursue grant monies, can administer and oversee those grant funds, and receive that revenue from outside entities beyond their traditional funding sources. A very important one here is to approve, disapprove sediment and erosion control plans. Again, the districts are a delegated authority. In this case, this comes through the Maryland Department of Environment and is outlined in the Environment article of state law, but it gives the power and oversight a little bit differently in different districts, but really is the named individual to be able to review and oversee any erosion and sediment control activity within the boundaries of the district. And that can be both on agricultural operations and urban operations that many districts are heavily involved with. To offset the cost of the erosion and sediment control and that function that the districts are providing, the districts are allowed to recommend a fee system for conducting those, providing those technical assistances and those resources, recognizing that it takes quite a bit of workload and capacity. The district can take fees for those services. Those fees often have to be approved and reviewed within the county structure itself and cannot be so exorbitant as to either undercut a third party or to generate too much revenue for the district itself. So it really does have to be true to the cost of the services, but those can be reviewed on a regular basis with your own county governments to set that fee system. Make and execute contracts, sue and be sued. Again, you're a legal political subdivision of the state, so you're carrying and executing legal authority. And as such, there are risks associated with some of that work. And so there is an opportunity where the districts could be party to a legal dispute or lawsuit. We can speak more as to kind of representation that the districts get through the Office of the Attorney General in the state. So you're not left to carry those legal disputes on your own, but you are, understandably someone that could be named in a legal dispute and have to be called to questions and or documentation. Next, we have providing contracting services, equipment, and supplies to landowners. Again, this speaks pretty similarly to the conservation equipment rental and being able to provide additional services. Again, any of those things that are in the context of carrying out the mission of the districts that may be outside equipment and supplies that could be provided to a landowner or an operator. You are also tasked to construct, improve, and maintain structures for the performance of subtitle objectives. So that is referring to when there are conservation programs, whether they be EQIP or the state MAX program, the district is the source of that technical assistance. And so you are often the one designing and providing construction oversight to make sure that the conservation practice is installed appropriately and according to NRCS standards, and providing that job approval, oversight, and authority to be able to say that the conservation practice hasn't been installed according to any of those requirements, and providing that verification. And then lastly, develop and publish comprehensive plans for conserving soil resources and preventing erosion in districts. So this can take many forms in terms of either local, annual plans, long-term strategic plans that the individual district chooses to review and enact. And it can also speak more broadly to the role of the district in state and federal programs. So the example here is the watershed implementation plan. Certainly the districts are very involved and regularly engaged on the watershed implementation plan and how the agricultural community is helping to address those Chesapeake Bay goals. And it's the roles of the supervisors to really think comprehensively and thoughtfully about the role of their district in helping to obtain those goals and putting those forward into different planning documents. Next slide. Okay, so just to quickly summarize, again, this is a lot of powers. Those are all outlined, as we said, in the Ag article in state law. So there are citations for each of those. They are wide and comprehensive. There are quite a number of them that the districts, some use more readily than others, but all of them are within the legal authority. We'll draw attention to just a couple that we will provide more detail about, again, that you're a legal entity, the ability of the districts to both sue and be sued, and what that means in terms of legal risk. Certainly within the districts, because you are a political subdivision of the state, you are also subject to open meeting laws. That's a set of laws meant to provide kind of transparency in government and to think about how the public engages with the district, their ability to attend meetings, to understand the work and the actions and decisions being made by the districts. And with all of those, again, that there is some legal responsibilities, but the districts are not having to go that alone. So we, through the Office of the Attorney General, that's housed here with the MDA, provide representation and support and guidance through the Office of the Attorney General and through legal counsel to be able to provide support to the district when questions on these matters are arising. And then last, we'll say, really, despite the job description, the long list of powers, the way we would say that's important for the supervisors to not just be informed by attending meetings and trainings like these, but to be really engaged. That's really what's most critical to executing the mission of the district is your participation, your active engagement, really thinking again at that local level and on a regular basis, thinking about plans and ways to prioritize workloads and programs specific to your region, as those priorities can be a little different across different districts. Certainly there's diverse agricultural operations. And we ask that the board supervisors are routinely assessing kind of your progress and priorities, that this isn't any one plan is a one and done and we put it on the shelf, but that we're proactively thinking about, how are we evolving and meeting the needs of all of the agricultural operations within our district. We as supervisors are adhering to, the highest bar of ethical practices as to how you're conducting business, the transparency in government and access, and making sure that the optics of everything is as it should be as well, so that there's no questions about conflicts. And then lastly, for you as a supervisor to be an example of conservation on your own farm operation, if you're fortunate enough to have one, or to be an advocate for conservation. So if you're someone who doesn't actively work as a producer, but just associated with agriculture, that you're an advocate for conservation, its benefits, and the role of the districts within Maryland. And then last, the board roles. We've talked through this one time, but again, it's important for us to link the idea of not just attending meetings, but thinking about leadership within the board itself. There is an opportunity each year for the board to think about what role you play as a supervisor and to, within your own structure, decide what leadership role you are most comfortable with. So those three roles are the chair, vice chair, and treasurer. The secretary, like I suggested, is often through the University of Maryland or additional support outside the appointed board members. But within that chair, vice chair, and treasurer role, really thinking about opportunities to use your strengths and your talents to be able to move the board forward and offer additional engagement and expertise that may better support your local district. And then to continue thinking about recruitment and representation, again, as the face and the type of diversity that we're seeing now in agriculture, and we see the farm operations evolving and new operations coming into the state, to be very proactive about thinking as our board representing all of those operations in the structure of our board. So are there opportunities to bring in new expertise, diversity in membership, diversity in operations? Any of those skill sets could be a valuable set of insight to the district itself. And so that's an opportunity for the board to have those conversations, to use MASCD and state committee to think more comprehensively about those recruitment strategies, and to think about how the associate supervisor role may be the proper avenue to recruit those individuals so that they can become more involved and engaged as an associate supervisor, and then potentially step into a full supervisor role at a later date and time. All right, so then within the boards themselves, they're broken out into a couple of different categories. Again, the supervisor handbook is probably a good source to think about all of these, but if you kind of take the day-to-day task of the board, or I should say monthly task, and kind of think about them in collective categories. So first, really that broad role is administrative. So again, engagement, attending and participating in the meetings, the different functions of the individual boards, engaging with your fellow members in regular conversations, even outside the board meetings, to talk about decisions and programs, to review and approve those conservation agreements. So the degree to which the board is a signatory to some of these, or reviewing some of the agreements that the district managers and DCs bring to you, that you are regularly involved in the oversight of those. We encourage each district to develop an annual work plan as well as an annual budget. There are several revenue sources coming into the district, so it's important from a financial standpoint to clearly understand where those are being received and how they can be used appropriately to carry out the mission of the district. And then certainly to evaluate progress towards your work plan, that if there are milestones and goals, that the district is actively looking to see if those are being met or if they need to be reviewed, revised at some particular interim. We would match an annual work plan with a long-range strategic plan to think about, a short-term and long-term, what is the direction that the board sees itself moving, and making sure that we're working in that long-term direction, setting those milestones and reviewing those with some frequency. To be acquainted with your Maryland laws related to soil conservation. Again, a lot of that has been in state law for many decades, has remained unchanged for many decades. There's a long history of conservation in the state of Maryland that we're very proud. So it's important as board supervisors to legally know where that information lives and to understand what your authorities and powers are as you assume the role of board supervisor. You should hold annual elections of the officers. Again, that board, vice chair, and treasurer. Those need to be held annually, and there is an opportunity for folks to move within those roles, of course, and not just assume the same leadership position continually. So we encourage you to have that conversation and think about those opportunities. And then for the district itself to establish sound business and fiduciary procedures. So again, the degree to which you are that independent entity and have your own protocols, your own fiscal responsibilities, and your own ability to set, bylaws and procedures and your own policies, that those are an active conversation within the district itself. Next. Programmatic responsibility, so is to assess resource and technical assistance needs. Again, this is a conservation partnership, so really the districts are a very key piece of how we deliver conservation in Maryland through both state and federal programs, but really that local kind of interface with landowners and operators is through the district, and the board have that responsibility of looking at what those needs are within their community. I'm having regular conversations with the district conservationist and the district manager, and then elevating any additional needs that may be being unmet in your county. We ask that you develop an annual report of your activities and accomplishments each year to make that publicly available so that folks can see the highlights and the work that's completed each year through the districts, and really just showcase the hard work that's being done. Third, it's important for the districts to stay engaged in legislation, both at the local and state level. Your MASCD resources are great to support you in this capacity, and make sure we understand what proposed or potential legislative changes could mean to how conservation programs are delivered. You may also raise, budget, and manage the district funds. Again, the multiple revenue sources. So it's inherent that the districts have an understanding of what those mean and how they're being used to execute the mission of the district. And then for you to have membership and engagement with more at the state and national level, so that the district operates within a unit of the other 24 districts within the state through MASCD, but also collectively at the national level through the National Association of Conservation Districts, and thinking about how the fuller voice of conservation districts is heard and represented. And that's both through meetings and conferences and trainings that are hosted throughout the year. We ask that you stay current with state committee. Like we said, each of the districts is assigned to one of 5 regions. Those regions are represented by an individual board member at state committee, and they meet monthly to bring forward any ideas or input from your region. So it's important that we're using that channel and line of communication to bring that information forward and discuss any needs or concerns through the programs themselves and through those organizations. And then to provide training opportunities, either for the district board to think about providing training, to elevate training needs, again, as a means of to be able to empower and further the mission of the districts, for the board supervisors and district managers to really lead on some of these, or to bring forward training as it might relate to staff needs and some of the lower level staff. Next slide. There are board responsibilities for information and education. So the first two were really about kind of the daily operations internal to the district. The information and education responsibilities, we really see that as your outward facing and how we present the face of the districts to the state of Maryland, both within your local community at the state level, that folks know what a conservation district is, they know the role of the conservation district, and they know how to engage with us and know the value that the conservation district can bring to the farm or to other operations. So we encourage the districts to be present and active in any number of programs locally, to promote conservation and programs to both your cooperators and to be an example of that conservation, like we said, on your farm operation, or to advocate for the district, and to really be proactive in connecting with your local leaders, whether that be a county government, your state elected officials, any other kind of key organizations that are active, even nonprofits within your community, really engaging with those individuals and participating in important programs that advance conservation, like Envirothon, representing the district at the county fairs, and just being a face and a voice for conservation in your community, and to be proactively engaging with stakeholders who may not be as familiar with the district at this point. Next. So fiduciary responsibilities, again, several revenue sources that can be coming into the district, but first and foremost, supervisors need to know that these are all considered public funds. So all of this money or revenue that's being generated, or money from the state that may be to carry out your district operations, all of those are considered public dollars. So it's very important that the district is spending and accounting for those dollars wisely, that all of those dollars are managed and accounted for in a way that is both transparent and documented, and in a way that is furthering the mission of the district. Nothing outside the roles and stated goals and authorities of the districts should be eligible expenses or uses of those funds. So again, maintaining consistency with the mission of the district. And really that's the role of the treasurer within the Board of Supervisors, to really make sure that all of this is being properly adhered to, and any policies that the district adopts related to fiduciary responsibilities, that the treasurer is documenting and adhering to all of those policies for the board itself. Next slide.
Okay, so Alicia just went over a lot of the roles and responsibilities and powers of the board supervisors, and we're going to take just a couple of minutes to touch a little deeper into the ethics question. So there's an ethics guidance policy from 2003 that a supervisor holds a public office, although not required by the State Ethics Commission to file disclosure forms, is still required to act ethically and honestly in discharging his or her responsibilities. So there's three components to this. So first, a supervisor must avoid using his or her office for personal gain. We talked about that a little bit earlier as well. But a supervisor shall not use his or her position to gain priority or additional benefits which are not available to others or in connection with private business ventures. A supervisor will not use information obtained in the course of a supervisor's official duties for personal gain. A supervisor shall not solicit a personal gift or accept a personal gift from a person or businesses that are under the jurisdiction of the district, that are negotiating or doing business with the district. This prohibition does not apply to meals, beverages, gifts less than $50, or gifts solicited on behalf of the district, or an activity sponsored by the district. The second component of this is that a supervisor shall ensure the highest standards of conduct and competence for all who administer or deliver service in district programs. I think that definitely falls under some of the board responsibilities that Alicia just outlined. And last, a supervisor shall avoid any conflict of interest and disclose promptly to the Board of Supervisors any financial or other matters that appear as a conflict of interest. So disqualification. A supervisor shall not participate in matters the outcome of which would have a direct economic impact on the supervisor, his or her spouse, siblings, parents, or children. A supervisor shall not participate in matters concerning any business entity to which the supervisor is an officer, director, trustee, partner, employee, or a partner to an existing contract. Or an exemption may be made if there is not a quorum, that there is no other official who may act, or if the nature of the conflict is disclosed to the board and is minor. And then prohibited employment or financial interest. A supervisor shall not have outside employment or any financial interest that would impair the impartiality or independent judgment of the supervisor. A supervisor shall not have financial interest that may cause them to be perceived as benefiting in a manner distinguishable from the public generally because of the performance or non-performance of the supervisor's official duty. And exceptions include when the outside employment or interest would not affect the supervisor's official duties and is necessary in order to obtain uniquely qualified supervisors. And this prohibition does not apply to employment held at the time of appointment that is disclosed to the board. Okay, and I wanted to read those specifically just to make sure that we walked through it correctly. But Alicia, I know you and I had talked about this and in relation to the rest of the presentation here and the powers and the duties of board supervisors. But one of the questions that I imagine would come up with this particular guidance is that a lot of supervisors, whether they're farmers or landowners in general, do benefit directly from the programs of financial and technical assistance that's offered by the districts. And so I just wanted to touch on that really quickly in terms of what specifically constitutes a conflict of interest and how some of those conflicts of interest are handled at the district level to avoid any issues.
Sure, great questions. And we recognize obviously that when we're asking someone to serve in a supervisor capacity, they're coming with an interest in conservation. They may very well be the farm operator themselves. So to assume that they would not also take advantage of financial and technical assistance through the district is an important thing to make a distinction. So supervisors can participate in any number of programs offered at the federal or state level. So whether that be EQIP or MAX, the state cover crop program, you absolutely can still participate in those programs. What we're suggesting by this policy is that the reviews and approvals of some of those, for example, the application materials that may be being signed by a district manager, the claims for payments when those receipts and accounts of the actual, value of the program, the contracts themselves being reviewed, that level of review and approval may not be done within the board itself. We would ask for some independent oversight. So what we often see is that if a board of supervisor is participating in a program, rather than the district manager of that board, being the signatory, they would send it to the adjoining district so that a different, independent, if you will, district manager would be reviewing any of the materials. And then they offer the signature and approvals so as to create a distinction within the board and the acting district itself.
Perfect.
Yeah. And I'll add on the outside employment, we increasingly see supervisors who are coming into the district and wanting to serve with the supervisors that may not be strictly agricultural backgrounds or farm operators. And we encourage that. We're actively looking, I think, for folks who are bringing additional insight and conservation expertise. And so there's nothing that would prohibit a certain type of employment as being a board supervisor, the one distinction being that office of profit that we defined earlier. But if someone is in the private sector, that's not to say they can't be a board supervisor. Again, it's disclosing where you're either family connection to a particular business or your own financial interest in a private company or private work that you may be doing could interact with board activities and actions, and just being very forthright about what that is, and if there's any conflict or perceived conflict that we're avoiding that, and again, the optics of anything being impartial. That's what matters.
Great. Okay.
All right, chapter 6, we're going to do understanding local, state, and federal laws that pertain to districts. So this is just going to be high level because there are a number of, pieces, at any of these levels that certainly the districts and the boards are going to engage with. But this is intended just to give kind of a high view of a couple, and then we can provide some resources for additional information as well. So next slide, Jen. So first and foremost, from really the technical assistance perspective, again, we've said that the districts are the lead source of conservation technical assistance in your area. So it is on a daily basis that you're engaging with landowners, operators, agricultural operations on any number of conservation questions. Often those activities are going to have additional needs outside the district. So those can be state and federal permits for an agricultural operator to be able to undertake conservation. And so while the district may not be the authority, issuing that permit per se, you're often that kind of source of information. So you're kind of that one stop where a landowner is coming and saying, what all do I need to know? And so the district has also helped often that kind of liaisoning and providing direction. So the state committee has put together what we think is a valuable resource here called a Farmer's Guide to Environmental Permits. It has a number of whether they be State Department of Environment, they can be Army Corps of Engineers for waterways permits. A lot of these are outlined in this permit guide. There is a link at the bottom of the page. This too is not completely comprehensive once you get into it, but it is kind of a fuller list. And so we recommend that the districts have this as a resource. There are printed copies as well as the website here that the districts and the Board of Supervisors can rely on or provide additional guidance as they're receiving questions from any number of agricultural operations. Next slide. So then another one on the administrative side, a really couple of key pieces here that we'll talk through, the kind of maintaining what we call freedom of information and compliance with those. So Maryland does have what's called an open meeting law. Again, the idea of being able to provide kind of transparency in government so that the individual stakeholder landowner can kind of understand the roles of the districts and the work that we're carrying out. So this state law really kind of speaks to how are public meetings conducted? What do they look like? What does that transparency and kind of guidance need to be? So it does require advanced public notice of your meeting location, your time, and your date. And requiring such delivery of information to news media, posting notices, etc. So if they're going to be a monthly board meeting, those are often advertised on the website for the district. It can be a Facebook page. Some still rely on maybe your local newspaper. We encourage you to put those out at least a couple weeks in advance so folks have full notice of how to attend or access the meeting if it was going to be virtual. It does require that minutes of the meetings to be recorded and available to the public. So by recorded, we mean, typed meeting minutes. Those do not necessarily have to be available on the website, to download, but do need to be available such that if a member of the public were to say, I'd like to see your meeting minutes from August of 2022, those could be produced and you could be able to provide that to an interested stakeholder. The open meeting law governs the process and restrictions for closing of meetings from the public. So there are times when the district needs to go into what we would call closed session. That can be that you're getting legal advice from counsel. That could be that you're talking about a personnel matter that doesn't need to be discussed in public. So the state open meeting law outlines what are the terms and exceptions of when a governing body like the districts can go into a closed and private session. And there is a checklist and criteria of being able to do that. And all of those are available on the Maryland Open Meeting Law website. It is really key to stay in compliance with this, that a trained member of the district has gone through training with the Maryland Open Meetings Law. So this is not just the district manager, but the board members themselves. This is an online training offered. It doesn't take very long, but it does go through kind of the procedures and outlines the information that you need to know for both the public sessions and the closed sessions, and it would give you a certificate once you've completed the training. So this is a one that we say that at least one board member needs to have gone through the training to make sure, again, that there is compliance and making sure that folks are readily aware of what those open meeting law requirements are, and to reach out to state committee where we have questions or additional needs for guidance on issues as they arise. And so in tie with that, if you'll go back one slide, Jen, the Opens Meeting Law ties with the Public Information Act. So they're two distinct laws, but the Public Information Act is in the case where the public, in addition to attending meetings or having access to maybe some of the meeting minutes, there are business and plans and documents and work products that the district is involved with. The Public Information Act is the law that would explain how those public records from government bodies can be accessed and distributed. So if there are certain conservation plans or documents that might have some sensitive information, the Maryland Public Information Act would talk about how someone would make those requests, how those requests would be reviewed, and then ultimately what would be disclosed from those documents request. Okay, next slide. So then we pair the State Public Information Act with its federal counterpart. So in federal, for the USDA, we call that Section 1619. That's Section 1619 of the Farm Bill. That is the section that discloses or prohibits USDA and its contractors and cooperators, that would be the districts, from disclosing information provided by an agricultural producer or owner of agricultural land concerning the operation, farming, or conservation practices, or the land itself. So this Section 1619 provision is very broad. It provides a lot of protection to an individual farm as to what records and information about their farm information can be disclosed. And certainly the districts as a conservation partner are also subject to these provisions. Each district signs an agreement between themselves and USDA's NRCS, and those provisions are outlined in that agreement. So again, we are subject to those provisions. They marry up very nicely with the state's compliance, but it's important to understand that there's a lot of levels of protection offered to these documents, and the district has the authority to be a custodian of those records in a way that's protective of the personal nature of some of the information. So when requests to review them or see those documents are made, particularly by outside parties, there are a set of rules and provisions that govern how those would be reviewed and disclosed. So to add to that, State Committee has been working with USDA on a guidance memo to provide some additional insight into kind of how these provisions should be being used within the district. And we expect a guidance memo, again, with just a little additional detail, to be issued in early 2023 and will be provided to all of the districts and the Board of Supervisors. Next slide. So then a couple of other laws of importance. These are kind of key employment laws. So really there are broad categories associated both at the federal and state. Again, they have their own sections of law as to where they're kind of housed, if you will, but really speak to very kind of similar non-discrimination terms. So, if we go back to kind of the Civil Rights Act, a lot of those named prohibitions for discrimination on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, age, marital status, all of those are protected classes of which someone's employment status cannot be discriminated based on any of those kind of protected classes in federal law. as well as in Maryland state law. So in Title 20 of the state government article, again, employees are protected against unlawful discrimination for any number of categories: race, color, sex, age, national origin, religion, disability, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, genetic information, and harassment and retaliation. The latter category of harassment and retaliation has been added more recently with specific interest and new focus on sexual harassment, and making sure that both the districts and the Board of Supervisors understand current state laws related to sexual harassment prevention. And that includes new training requirements that the state updated as recently as 2018 and has continued to update state law to make sure that folks fully understand expectations around sexual harassment prevention, what that looks like in the workplace, and the reporting procedures and compliance procedures. So MDA hosted a series of trainings on sexual harassment prevention in 2021 and 2022. We did in-person trainings across a number of areas and invited all of the board supervisors to participate, and we'll make you aware of any future trainings on this subject if they are scheduled. Next slide. Okay, another kind of protection, the liability and torts claim. We have spoken before about the districts being an independent division of the state. As a political entity, it does put you at a sue and be sued is kind of one of the powers of the district itself. But it's important to understand that the law does offer protections to both the district and individual supervisors through the Liability and Tort Protection Act in the state of Maryland. So what that offers is it protects both the district supervisors and its employees of any tortuous acts, so long as your duties were carried out within the scope of your duties as a board supervisor, that you acted without malice or negligence when you were carrying out the action, and that it stems from claims made within state law. So what that is saying is that those protections are housed and those protections offered and described in Maryland state law. If those claims come, or if there's concerns about a district or a supervisor that might create a liability or a legal dispute, the Attorney General, which has counsel sitting at MDA, would be contacted, and they would be able to provide additional guidance and support to the district. They do have the discretion to decide what that legal representation looks like, and how that support, like the capacity and the terms of that representation, and often provide that legal representation to the degree that the state, and the districts themselves are part of a lawsuit. So that can be the district, the individual supervisor, to individual employees within the district. Again, all of that legal support coming through the Office of the Attorney General here in Maryland. The Attorney General can choose not to participate depending on the claim and the nature of the suit, but certainly they have interest in representing the district and making sure that the goals and the mission is being upheld, and so are often kind of a key legal asset and resource that the districts are able to prescribe to get additional information. There is additional guidance on this in the form of an advice letter that the Office of the Attorney General offered in August of 2019 that goes into extensive detail about the liability and tort coverage offered to supervisors and to districts. It is several pages in length, but is a public document and can be provided to any of the districts if they wish to see the legal opinion of the Attorney General on this matter. Next slide.
Okay, so wrapping up here with our last chapter, looking at some other considerations for the boards to consider. So in 2020, a state committee worked with the districts to conduct a leadership self-assessment in 4 key areas, and that was modeled on the National Association of Conservation Districts tools. So it evaluated, or asked the districts to evaluate themselves in these 4 areas of organization and governance, work planning, program delivery, and community engagement. And so going through the self-assessment, there is a maximum potential score of 104. 22 districts participated, and the average score among the districts was a 71. So the self-assessment indicated that the strengths among the districts in general was community engagement in that area, but there needed to be some additional resources and focus on work planning and governance. And so what we've looked at to address some of those needs that were identified from the self-assessment is to develop a training roster, identify topics for training, and to start to conduct that training. So we've assembled a resource library that's housed on the MASCD website. There's the link there that includes templates and examples of some of the governance documents that the districts it's available for their use. We've also, Alicia and I have started to coordinate quarterly calls with district managers. We call them roundtable discussions to address some of the topics that were identified. And those have been particularly helpful in sharing ideas and successful strategies and offering an opportunity for maybe newer district managers to ask questions from experienced district managers and share information on how districts can apply some of the governance principles and work planning and things like that successfully in their own districts. At MASCD's annual meeting this past year, we held a session called Building Better Boards that focused on recruitment and retention and also succession planning. And I think we're going to continue to work on providing resources and training in those areas in the future as well. So just some other questions to ask, building on that leadership self-assessment. And areas of evaluation that the districts need to consider to make sure that they are working successfully and are kind of optimizing those opportunities for board engagement. So what problems will districts face when members don't understand or fulfill their roles? Hopefully the presentation here is really helpful to that end. Are members engaged in district activities? We talked earlier about the importance and how it's critical to district function for board supervisors to be engaged in district activities. Do members express confusion about certain roles and responsibilities? Do you have a process for evaluating board effectiveness? So the leadership self-assessment was one tool for that is a good idea to revisit periodically. But there may be others that the boards can use to that end. So what are the opportunities or strategies for increasing understanding and acceptance of roles and responsibilities? Are there different strategies for new supervisors versus experienced or long service supervisors? And are associate supervisors included in these strategies? So just a few more questions for boards to consider in terms of opportunities to be more effective. Okay, and with that, here's the contact information for Alicia and myself. If you have any follow-up questions or ideas for additional training topics that we can address. Alicia, do you have anything else to add to help close this up today?
No, thank you, Jen, for helping co-host this. We hope it was helpful information and the start of some other conversations on any of these modules that we can go a little further with future trainings or answer future questions as folks really assume a full board supervisor role and really engaging. So thank you.
Thank you.